Good morning, everyone. Please let me know if the how the sound sounds. We had a hot mic the other day. I had a really hot mic the other day, so I'm kind of a little paranoid about the mic being too hot or too quiet. I can't hear it. So, how's the audio, buddy? You're the number one fan. You have a crown. It says number one. You did it. Okay, you can hear me. Sounds good? Yeah, it's not too weird. It's fantastic. You should feel honored. I know, it's a burden. It's a burden. Gonna have to lay that crown down at the feet of Jesus. Oh, look at this. I got look. So you're texting me. All right. Well, there you go. How interactive are we? Please, everybody, don't forget to like and subscribe. So Karen has taken the kids to see A Christmas Carol. Very excited. Kids are excited about that. Me and Minnie were talking about it last night. No, I want to show you guys something that I think is already pretty cool, and I don't think you ever get to see it. And that's back here. And this is PTL security. When I was a kid, I used to have bodyguards. Had to have bodyguards because we were threatened to be kidnapped all the time. And one of the cool things about this is that the gold badge was the chief of security, and he gave that to me when I turned 17. His name was Don Hardister, and he was kind of like, a lot of those guards were like fathers to me. And the other one was Tommy Stamps, who is my personal bodyguard, and that was a patch they wore. But anyway, I put that in a little memory box, and it's back there, and I'm always sitting in front of it. And the other day I was like, yeah, I should share that with everybody. So there you go. Every now and then I'll grab something off the magic shelf and share a little bit about it with you. Well, let's get officially started. Welcome to Revolution Gathering. Today is a good one, a big one. If you need to buckle up, let the bar that goes across your lap, let the lap bar come down nice and tight. It's there to keep you safe. Hold on to it. If it gets too shaky, keep your arms and legs inside at all times, because today we're going to go on a ride. Today is another call for reformation. So I did this talk already, but I did this talk to a computer screen that I thought was recording. And I was doing it so Karen could have the day off, but I did the whole talk. I did the whole talk. And this is a talk that I've prepared quite differently from most of my talks. It was a very unique way for me to do it. And that's been interesting lately. I've been really, if I was a musician, it would make more sense, I guess. But like, this came to me, and it's been something that's been on my mind for a lot. And it just really came to me one night, and I just started writing. And so this is a little bit different. But so I was like, okay, but I should record this talk because it felt so personal. And I was like, maybe I should just do it, record it and then post it, and let people kind of see it for what it is rather than bringing it to you live. And this will be completely different. But I recorded the whole thing. Well, I didn't record the whole thing. I did the whole thing right here, set up everything, and it didn't record. And it was going to be a two-parter, but the great thing about having a little bit of time is, one, I think I've nailed it down to a one-parter, and two, I don't have to have the kids, so I can go long, and this is recorded so you can stay and go all you want. Revolution, you don't always have to be here. I never like to be at church at a particular time. I remember getting cassettes. Remember getting cassettes listening to talks, listening to sermons in your car. This is, ooh, I need to pull over and write this down. Ooh, I got to rewind that. But today is one of those days where I feel like I'm sharing something that's really been on my heart for a long time, and it's one of those things where it's almost like nags at me. It's like it's like I've got sticky notes, you guys. I've got sticky notes here, not just my normal notebook, but I've added sticky notes. Um, yeah, it's been kind of nagging at me, and probably most of my career. It's easy to just get focused on all the insanity that's going on right now, and kind of allowing your life to be in kind of a 1 year bubble. Like, oh, everything's been so insane, and it has. Things have been crazy this year. Not a lot of bad news, a lot of horrible treatment of our fellow human beings. Um, but yeah, so it's something that I wanted to talk to you guys about. So that's what we're going to do. Something I need to share. Hopefully you'll share this with other people if it works out, because we're going through this together, folks. So you're with me. Please don't forget also to give us a thumbs up and subscribe and sign up to YouTube. It really helps us stay out there. And I think it would be great to get us in the algorithms, so people see this kind of stuff. They don't just see a bunch of like right-wing conservative Christians saying why it's okay to treat other human beings less than, um, or even other Christians saying it's okay to treat conservative Christians less than. Uh, just kind of give people a different view of Christianity. And I think that's what we do here at Revolution. And so let's try to get that out there and make this happen. Um, I've been working on the Christmas trees and doing all that kind of stuff. It's that time of year again. That's what I did for Thanksgiving. I was with the trees. Only sold 2 trees because it was raining. That's Seattle for you. And but got to sit in the caravan and hang out. Anyway, holidays are great. My daughter is literally Christmas crazy right now. She is Christmas crazy. We've got a pink Christmas tree. If you want to see it, I'll put it up on Instagram. And so we got a pink Christmas tree. We always try to do a fun Christmas tree every year. I've shared it with some of you already, but try to make the best out of the holiday seasons, even when it can be really tough. This is financially probably one of the toughest Christmases I've had in a long time, but I do my best to kind of make it fun anyway, especially for the kiddos. So yeah, let's look at this. So we got a little time. I know I'm drawing it out a little bit here, but there is a method for my madness, because I want this to be right, and I want us to really see this and find this and try to grasp what we're doing here. So in the 12-step program in recovery, there is saying, and I find a lot of really sayings from 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 the 12-step anonymous program, that maybe I am, maybe I'm not, because it's anonymous. You'll never know. Is these the little sayings that they have, and my first year in sobriety, when I was 21, and these little sayings like one day at a time and things like that, you just grasp onto them. Take what you need, leave the rest behind. They had that kiss, keep it simple, stupid. you know all these reminders is to like live in the moment, make it through today. You're going to get through this. I mean, I could remember I would drive around. I would go to like midnight meetings sometimes because they would have midnight meetings. And that was like white knuckle people. We're all just smoking cigarettes and just white knuckling it. And so sometimes I go to a 10 o'clock meeting, and if there was a midnight, I try to hit that. But I drive around waiting for meetings and just listen to jazz. I don't even like jazz, but I listen to a lot of jazz. And it just, I think the pure craziness of just kind of was the only thing that would soothe my panicky mind of being like, I don't have a crutch. I don't have a magic answer now. I don't have this liquid that allowed me to relate to people and allowed me to enjoy myself. And now I have to learn to do something new. And there was this saying that says, you've got to learn to live life on life's terms. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, is living life on life's terms. And why is that important? It's funny. Oh, there it is. Okay. It's funny. My first time I did this talk, I had no Bible scriptures, so no Bible in there. But this time around, this morning, I was kind of thinking like, I might put some things in there that kind of relate to this. I mean, since we are a church and everything, but living life on life's terms. In dialectic behavioral therapy, they called it radical acceptance. And when I was in Minnesota, I started taking this dialectic behavior therapy, DBT classes. And you take like group setting, and you meet with a therapist, but you also have to go to these group meetings every day. And every morning I had to go, and they had these meditations, and I was always late. And then they had to have a talk with me about not skipping meditation, because I was just like, I don't need meditation. I don't need that, Jay, they told me they'd kick me out if I didn't come to the meditations. So I had to radically accept the meditation time. Obviously telling me where my mind was at the time. I just didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. But this idea of radical acceptance, of accepting just where you're at, for me, I think for a lot of us, it's very easy to just be so overwhelmed within the moment and feeling the need to change the moment, or feeling powerless. And sometimes all you can do is say, I am powerless. This is the radical acceptance. So why is this? Why live life on life's terms? Why practice this radical acceptance? Is because we're human. And today, what I want to talk about, and kind of my message to the church, capital C, is we must reclaim our humanity. We must reclaim Christianity for people, all people, for humanity. And I feel we've lost a lot of our humanity in the church and as Christians. And that worries me. That is something I think a lot about. And it's just been this kind of like, sometimes at night in my dreams, sometimes, I mean, it's so bizarre. Sometimes it's just like we seem to lack humanity so often in this, and replace it with other things. But I want to talk about, like, one of the things about living life on life's terms is it's embracing the reality, especially when things are difficult, and really learning to change how we react to that, changing our attitude in those moments. It's kind of this work on, so we don't find an easy answer. And I feel like religion often can be somewhat like in a 12-step program, when you're battling a substance, that sometimes for people, religion is the substance. Religion is the addiction. Religion is something that's a false hope that we have. We've heard it called a crutch, and people would be like, I love my crutch. I love my 1,000-foot crutch. I love it. Hallelujah. And people are like, yes, you need a crutch. It helps you get through things. But I I don't think we one of the things I had to do when I got sober was I had to live life on life's terms. But I had to learn to live again. And I had been drinking since I probably 12, 13, 14 years old. And so I had to learn how to not, I was like emotionally in certain areas of my life as a 14-year-old because I just masked my emotions. I used this as a way to communicate with others, to deal with this. And I feel like we often do that with religion. We often use it as this way of of a coping mechanism, and we use it in a lot of unhealthy ways. We use it as an excuse to not be a good person, or to be judgmental, or well, I didn't think of it that way. It can really cloud our humanity, and it can be an excuse. And somewhere along the lines, I think we've misunderstood the Bible where it's like dying to flesh or picking up your cross, and we've thought that humanity is the sinful thing. To be human is to be sinful. Um, oh, I'm not of this world. Like if we're human, if we embrace our humanity, somehow there's something bad about that, something that's wrong about that. And that's not what it's saying. I think what it's talking about is desires that lead us to escapism, to cause us, when it talks about desires and dying to flesh, but it often says the things it's talking about is like only thinking people in your own group are right, uh, gossip, and when it's a drunkenness. I mean, it's all this stuff that's like these things that's the fleshly things it's talking about as the escapism. And in some way, we're like, okay, well, we'll just make religion, we'll just make Christianity, we'll just turn that into the escapism, and that's how we'll deal with it. Anyway, I'm going to look at Matthew, the book of Matthew, real quick. The more I learn about the book of Matthew, the more what scholars say about it, and scholarship is interesting because it has to have evidence of what something is, and so they often say, "Well, this is really a more of the Jewish gospel, and it's more law based." And then you have to think, well, did the writer know about Paul? Because this was probably 30, 40 years after all this. So, well, we don't have any evidence to claim that, so we don't know that. I'm going to go as a preacher. As a preacher, I don't even like to be called one of those, but as one, I'm going to say I think they did know a little bit more about Paul, and I think Matthew is often misunderstood, but I could be completely wrong. Like if I said that and put that on TikTok, you might see Dan McClellan be like, "All right, let's see it," and then say there's no proof. So I get it. I get it. Sometimes I just have to move on faith. Hallelujah. But in Matthew 6, it says, it's Matthew 6:34. So do not worry. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's troubles is enough for today. And what is this saying? This is saying each day is enough trouble. Each day has enough trouble on its own. And that's the kind of concept of living life on life's terms. That's kind of the concept of one day at a time and embracing your humanity and the limits that you have on your humanity, and not give into like magical thinking or supernatural thinking, but just going like, okay, today is the day I need to live. I need to get through. And so what can I do today? Because we're all worried about tomorrow. I mean, how many of us are worried about our next paycheck, how we're going to pay our rent, how we're going to get Christmas presents for our children? I mean, that is a huge, huge worry. But this is like worry, figure out today. And so for me today, this was this talk, because this talk, I prepared it so differently than I usually do. How am I going to do this? So here's this talk, and I got to worry about that right now, not my bills. So we have that, and I feel like that's Christ saying, like, you're human. You don't have control over tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to come. It'll be here. It's just a day away. Also in Matthew 11:28, Listen to this. It says, Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And really, what I see this as saying is let go of the heavy expectations. You've got to let go of the heavy expectations. And that comes into that living life on life's terms. That comes into those moments of radical acceptance. Is that, okay, it is heavy, it is this, but why accepting that, accepting, oh, there's going to be issues, there's probably going to be arguments, but I'm going to try to live in the moment. I'm going to live in the time. I'm not going to continue to project into the future of everything that's going to happen. It allows you to lay some of those burdens down. And so I feel like even Jesus is here calling us into humanity, calling us to realize that we are human, to see those human limitations, to see the the reality of humanity, and that there's nothing wrong with being human. I once had my sponsor tell me I was haphazardly human, and I've always kind of worn that as a, here it is over here, a badge of honor. um, if you think about it, in John 1:14, Jesus, it said about Jesus, the word became flesh, became human. So flesh isn't always this bad thing. Um, Hebrews 2:14 around there says, he uses us in our weakness. When we're weak, he's strong. Our weakness is part of that. Our humanity is part of that. In Philippians 2:5-8, he says, he talks about Jesus, and he took on the form of a human, and he gave up his rights. He was a human being. Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens. Help each other. Life is tough. It's a struggle. We've got burdens. We've got things. Don't compare yourselves to one another, but bear one another's burden. There's all sorts of things that affirm our humanity and our human experience. And we can't let that go. We've got to continue to reclaim that. And I think we have these rituals and these practices that just continue to pull us away from our humanity. If you believe that God is the ground of being, as Paul Tillich says, or God is your ultimate concern, your focus, if you believe God is God, I can't really explain what God is. I don't think God's an old man in the sky. But if you believe this, then you will realize life is part of the plan. If not, the whole plan is to be life, is to be human. There's a Pete quote, always someone to be human is divine, or something like that. I can't remember. It's a really, I know I'm massacring it. Maybe somebody else can put in there, but to be something, but to human is divine. One of the other things I wanted to say is when we are disturbed maybe by this, when you're disturbed by like this, if you're disturbed by this idea of calling us to humanity, calling us to not just to like, oh, we've got to reach humanity. No, us to be human, us to be haphazardly human, us to realize our limitations, us to realize one day at a time and radical acceptance and living in this world. It doesn't mean we don't make plans and things for tomorrow, obviously. This is trying to base us back into what I want to do is pull us back into reality, pull us back into life, pull us back into the real world. Because if you're disturbed by this talk, I want you to pause. I want you to ask yourself if your action is streaming from a place of unacceptance. Have you let go of the reality of humanity? Have you given into the kind of the spiritual, magical thinking that we can fall into sometimes? Have you become has religion come in there, or is there a need for change in us? You know, um, are we disturbed by humanity? Are we disturbed by our own humanity? Are we? Yes, we see a lot of horrible, horrific things in humanity, but part of humanity is also love. I mean, that's why Jesus said, "Love each other, love your neighbor as yourself, and do these things." Those are the calls to put desire into one way or the other. This is the call to, like, listen, these are the things you can do. You can love your neighbor. These are the things that can help. Lay down your heavy burden, accept this, love one another, carry one another's burden, help each other out. All this is very human things, but somehow I feel like we've gotten away from humanity. And I think capitalism plays a part of that because it promises to fill uh, a void. If you just have this next product, or you just have this thing, if you just have enough money, you'll be at peace. But how many times have we seen, how screwed up billionaires are, and how screwed up musicians and stars, they have it all, yet they still have suicide, they still have affairs, they still have divorces, they still have really terrible times. you know the proof is there's nothing. I don't even think God or religion can fill the void, that you almost have to accept that there's always going to be some sort of lack within us. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's radical acceptance. I think that's realizing, like, okay, because why do we keep trying to fill this thing? Maybe we could just radically accept, like, oh, there's always going to be a lack. A little Amazon or eBay order, might make it feel good for a few minutes, but then you got to live back into humanity and reality. I think we saw this a lot, like in my parents' age, with Christian television, and this want to create. My dad create hotels and theme parks and things like this, or Christians just, oh, we got to get more screens, we got to have a good worship band, we got to do all these things, and it kind of seemed like, how can we get so far? How can we create this experience that feels like it's filling a void? People like to go to concerts, so we'll get good musicians and we'll fill the void, and we'll get the feelings going, and it's like the serotonin we need from Instagram and things like that. How do we do that? Because serotonin seems to get people into the church. uh, I think that maybe when opium what was it? It was, who said religion is the opium of the masses. um I know he's a philosopher. I don't know why. It's Nietzsche. And I believe in some, that quote doesn't just end there. There's more to it. And you should read the whole quote, because it's not as, shocking if you read the whole quote, if you read the whole everything he was saying. But I think there's some truth in that, because when we make these religious traditions, when we try to, like, you know, doll it up and fill it up with this kind of empty promises, or these promises that everything's going to be fixed and that God's going to fill that hole, and that it's just more of this, like, capitalistic idea of just satisfaction. Like, we're just trying to sell satisfaction. Well, and you'll see a lot of the New Testament writers realize, like, okay, I can't offer anybody satisfaction right now. Don't work right now. So let's talk about the afterlife. So, oh, in the afterlife, everything's going to be great. Oh, that's going to be where it's at. So we'll eventually reach satisfaction. But if you think about what the Gospels say Jesus said, and you think about what the Apostle Paul wrote, they did write a little bit about those things, but mostly it was living life now on life's terms, loving others, helping others, serving the poor, caring about people, making hell a little less real on earth for others and for ourselves. That this would happen. And one of the things I learned in a 12-step program too is, when you serve people, when you help people, when you encourage people, you also get your mind off yourself. So when I would sponsor someone and try to help them, give them what I've learned, and do that type of thing, it also helped me grow a little bit and find out more about me, and help me to get my mind off of myself and put it in, invest into somebody else's. Um, So one of the things I just want to make sure I got all my notes. Another thing I had written down here, I got little notes everywhere because this is, like I said, it was kind of a different talk for me. Faith is relational. It's not mechanical. You know, it accepts human limits. That's one of the things we see is that it does accept human limits. That it's not this magical way of thinking. And I'm going to talk a little bit about manipulation, but we're going to wait till we get a little bit further. But one of the things that really was interesting to me is in the 12-step program, they always say the serenity prayer. And I think the serenity prayer is another clear example of the call of living life on life's terms. And it's, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And then the 12-step programs I went to, we always grab hands, get in a circle, and we would say that prayer. And if you think about that, give me peace to accept things I can't change. Give me peace for the things I can't control. Give me peace for the things that I can't maybe manipulate out of this. And let me see my limitations, and let me find a way to radically accept this. Allow me to see my human limitations. Allow me to be a human in this and not think I have to be a superhuman. But it also says, give me courage to change the things I can and the wisdom to know the difference. So allow me to know the difference between those things that I can't change and those things I can change. And when I do, give me the courage to make those changes that need to happen. And so you have this really great idea of, like, here you are, a prayer that tells us to live life on life's terms, to find out what our limitations are and what our but I grew up in a world where Christianity said there are no limitations. I grew up in a world where I was like, I don't want to say, I wasn't even name it and claim it, but it was just like, oh, that's the enemy talking. You can have that. You can have the big church. You can have this. And I was so caught up in that, even at the height of revolution in like 2004, 2005 of our church, we had staff, we had money, not a ton of money, but we had enough money to pay staff, and everybody got paid, and we had health insurance, and we were doing great. And all of my mind was like, this isn't enough. We're meeting in a rock and roll club. It was amazing. Great. Probably our biggest congregation, and we're online. I was speaking all over the country, sometimes the world. And all I could think was, it's got to be bigger, because there was that thing that was taught in me. And I saw my father create this huge church and ministry and things like that. But also everything that I saw in the church was, you've got to do something greater for God. You've got to do big. It's got to be bigger. It's got to be bigger. You're never satisfied. Now I live in a reality where I'm working 3 jobs, not including this one, to try to make ends meet. And how I look back and go like, well, if I could just go back in time and just tell myself, like, man, you need to appreciate what you have. You need to sit in this moment. You need to focus on the people that are here. You don't need to be thinking about more people or a bigger place or a bigger budget or a bigger, be grateful, find the peace. You're in a good place, but hindsight, right? So I'd just like to say, we in 12 steps, we'd always say, hi, I'm Jay and I'm a blank, blank, blah, blah. So today I'm just going to say, hi, I'm Jay and I'm a human. Haphazardly so. So one of the things I do really think get in the way, and Christians really suffer from, and Christianity really suffers from, is magical thinking. Now we might say, like, oh, it's spiritual, it's this, is that, but magical thinking. I'm going to use an example. The first one that comes to my mind is an experience I had with my dad. And we were talking about the book of Revelations. And my understanding of the book of Revelation at this time, when me and my father were having this conversation, and this must have been 10 years ago, maybe even longer than that, probably longer than that. And I said, well, Dad, the book of Revelation is written in like this code. So if it was found, people wouldn't be killed. And it was kind of a book for the oppressed, for people who are going through. Now I look at the book of Revelation as more of like fan fiction, it's kind of this way, like, we're going to get our revenge one day. It's kind of like, it's not good now, everything's bad, but one day Jesus is going to come down and slit everybody's necks and walk through their blood. And, it's just, honestly, I don't think the book of Revelation is canon worthy, but I didn't, I wasn't there for the vote. There's a lot of reasons that book bothers me. Because I think there's a lot of magical thinking that goes in there. And I said, but isn't this a book of the oppressed? Wasn't it written for the people at the time? It's not a book of, it's not a prophecy book. It's not saying that these are the things that are going to happen. It's just saying this is what's happening, and this was represented this at the time and this at the time. And that's from the scholarship I'd studied. I said, oh, yes, I believe that. You're right. It is. But it's also a book of prophecy. And so sometimes if you listen to people preach, even those, and you see this a lot with apologetics. When you see people preach, they will put, every book has a double, like they'll know enough, but they do, there's got two meanings though. It's got what it was written to then, and then it's got what it really meant for all of us once it ended up in the Bible, basically. Once it became that, they're a little magic, like they, bing, you're in the canon, bing, you're magical now. It's no longer whatever you intended it to be. It's even more, and we're going to read into it to think of that it's more. And so you'll see some people like Dan McClellan and Pete Enns, I think is the name, and guys like this, and people explain like this isn't how it works, but it's become a custom over hundreds of years that we just think that this is how it works. This is, it's got this meaning, it's got this meaning, or we're so submerged into our traditions and our customs that when we look up at these words, when we look through this what we're submerged in, we read the Bible through a different context, a context that says, this has a deeper meaning, or this has another meaning. The book of Galatians wasn't just confronting this issue. It had issue. Now, yes, you can use and say, I can learn from this letter. I can learn from these writings, and we can apply them to today. But realizing that the author didn't think they were sitting down and writing a magical book, that they didn't think that, I'm writing it to these people, but then in the future, it will have a double meaning. And so that's where we kind of project on to magical thinking and think that, we want control, and we use religion to use control. I think a lot of you who are listening to Revolution right now, whether you're here or on the podcast, a lot of us left the church because there was too much control. They wanted to control everything. And don't smoke those cigarettes. Don't listen to that music. Don't go to those places. Don't hang out with those people. I remember when I first really started to understand the Bible, probably in my early 20s, I remember thinking like everything I learned as a child in the church, so much of it was the complete opposite of what Jesus did and what Jesus taught. And not in a malicious way. I know it was in a way to protect me. I'm not saying that it was like malicious and awful. And like they were like, I don't think they were doing it on purpose. But like, I always think of Matthew, Matthew's collecting taxes, and Jesus walks up and says, come follow me. And then they go to Matthew's house, and people are like, oh my gosh, he's at Matthew's house. And there's all sorts of horrible people at Matthew's house. And look at these people Jesus is hanging out with. And then you start to realize all these people Jesus hung out with. And I'm going like, you guys told me to like avoid Matthew. Don't go to don't ask Matthew to hang out. And two, never go to Matthew's house. It was always just like this avoidance of people, avoidance of reality, avoidance of humanity, like even Christian music. There's a lot of really cool Christian punk rock and stuff in the early 90s that came out. Really good stuff. A lot of bands are still around. But for the capitalist Christians and for they were going like, well, we're going to give you guys alternatives, and even in some of the Christian bookstores or in Christian magazines, it would be like, if you like this band, you're going to love this. And it was like, we're going to give you an alternative. So it's like, we want you to step out of reality and have your own music, your own church, homeschool, all these things of like Christian school. And then you'll just live in this world, and you won't have to really deal that much with the other people. We're going to create a bubble. And that's where I start seeing losing our humanity, because now we're told to think away. We're told to vote a certain way. We're told to listen to certain things. We're told to avoid certain things. And it's all based, I think it's based out of a good heart. But for me, unfortunately, I think what we're seeing now is the lack of humanity that it has produced. That there are people who say they follow Christ and can support how immigrants are being treated by ICE, or they can support how uh, what's happening to Palestinians every single day. Like they can just be like, oh, well, they're more, and then they're more worried about their taxes going towards people eating and having SNAP benefits than their taxes going towards war and killing and murder and starvation. And now they're worried, oh, well, what if a drug addict gets food? What if a drug addict's children get food? You know, that's losing your humanity. That's not living life on life. And then we get worried when we start nitpicking people's lives. And a lot of these people, they have to build up this reputation that they're perfect and they have their life together. And look, I follow Jesus just in the perfect way. And I've got all the answers. And then what happens is we always find out they weren't perfect. They were doing something. Maybe they slept with somebody, or they took money, or they did something they weren't supposed to. They fell into a temptation because the pressure was too much. And it just goes, they're human. Oh, they fell from grace. No, they were human. They were human the whole time. Humans screw up. Humans get tempted by desires. Humans want to fill a void. Humans, when things are missing and we tell people they have to live a certain way, they find a way to be secretly human. It's that idea of, now that I don't have to be perfect, I can be good, you know. And what happens is we make people say they're going to be perfect, and God's going to make you perfect, and God's going to make you whole, and you're not going to need anything else. And you go like, okay, well, I'm going to have to pretend this to get through this, because the Bible says all fall short of God's standard. Yet God, gracious kindness, declares us not guilty. We are humans. We are human beings. And instead we turn people into, we put people on pedestals, and then we allow them to put us on pedestals, and it leads to disappointment. And it's really just magical thinking. It's everybody that's where the magical thinking mixed with group think becomes really dangerous. And we start thinking for ourselves and hurting other people and tearing each other apart. And I see it so much now. And I don't just see it in conservative churches. I see it in progressive churches. I see it all over the place. I see this idea of a magical thinking, a magical way of living that just doesn't accept life on life's terms. We think somehow that we're going to be supernaturally lifted out of reality, and that we're not going to have to deal with all the bullshit that everybody else has to deal with, or we can practice some sort of escapism. That's what drinking was for me, was escapism. That's what, I don't know how many people are like, I don't want snapping. I don't want free. I pulled my kids out of school. I teach them at home. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with homeschooling necessarily, but I'm just saying, when you tell me that you're doing it to avoid people's humanity, that and the people are like, oh, you kids go to school and they learn about, being inclusive, and they're trying to put their liberal motives on them. I'm like, I work at a school. Okay. And I see all these teachers at the end of the day. If any of these teachers started out thinking like, I'm going to indoctrinate these children, I would say about after day 3, they realized, I don't have any time to indoctrinate these children. I don't have any money I have to make sure that the kids have snacks, that they have school tools. They have to do this. I have to teach. They're all exhausted. They're wiped out. They're hot. They're like, watch them. They're going to snip at each other. They're tired. They're exhausted. They've been with hundreds of our kids all day. Some people have 30 to 40 kids a class, and that's insane, right? And we just project this magical thinking of, well, I'm going to condemn it. I'm going to judge it. I'm going to do this. So a lot of times when I see people, they're condemning like public school system, all these things for certain things, I'm like, it's really magical thinking. Like, what would help public school systems is a better budget and free meals for children, so the kids can pay attention and be alert. Those would help. School supplies help. A good curriculum helps. But this magical thinking of like, oh, they're turning them into crazy liberals or they're turning them into whatever, oh, there's kids who speak Spanish there. My kids aren't going to be, like it's insane. But to me, it's this like, again, magical thinking that's taught in these churches or in these communities and these peoples of these small moments where they've all become their own little group and they become their own little, um, just community. And I go, okay, we've got our community here. And I don't think churches should be community. I said it because when we do this, it was different in the Bible times because it was like a group of people who had to stay alive. Okay. Um, and get jobs and work with each other and create a society. But now we get these communities, but that means we're holding people out. And then all of a sudden we just go, it's so bad out there. And it's like that M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Village, where it's like, oh, you can't go out there because there's monsters in the woods and we can only go so far. But because the reason they don't want them to leave the village is because it's actually not the 19 or 1800s. It's now. It's sorry to mess that up for you. Spoiler alert. And so the adults have to create these costumes and go out and do things, and they have to come in and kill things every now and then. And we create this world where we're trying to protect people from reality, from life itself, because we say it's so bad, it's so horrible that if we've got to make it a little bit more horrible to really keep people out of it, so we'll be a little bit free with how we talk about that, and we'll villainize the people that we think we should villainize more. And the problem is now we're kind of at the end of that, and we're seeing people villainize our immigrant brothers and sisters. We're seeing people villainize people. Oh yeah, blow up those boats. Do all these type of things. We see what's happening with politics, and people who are in Christian communities going, oh, okay, or then other people in Christian communities going, those people are evil and this or that. And it's like, how do we come back to humanity? How do we reclaim our humanity? How do we do that? I can't read it. I've got a lot. You guys are really having good conversations. I hope it's going well. I can't really get in there and read them all because I'm trying to do this talk. Colossians. Hold on a second. Where we go? There we go. Colossians. In Colossians 2:20, it says, listen to this. This is really interesting because I feel like we've all heard this probably used in different ways for everybody, but let's just listen to what's said here. If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the universe. Now listen to that. If with Christ died to the elemental spirits of this universe, why do you live as you still belong to the world? So you're like, oh, we don't belong to the world. Okay, maybe we should pull everybody out of school and maybe we should do these certain things. But let's go a little bit further with it. What else does it say? What are the elemental spirits of this world? Why do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. All these regulations refer to things that perish with use. They are simply human commands and teachings. They have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-imposed piety, humility, and severe treatment of the body, but they are of no value in checking self-indulgence. So it's just like it's saying like when we get into these religious ways of living I don't do that and I don't do this. This is self-indulgence. It appears to be piety. It seems to be right. And people see this and they're drawn to it and they don't think of something like this where it's going like, oh, these are just human things. It's going to pass. We're all going to pass. We're all going to die. In 100 years, all new people, mostly. I mean, now people live into like 111, so there'll be some people. But mostly all new people, all new problems, all new situations. And so that's the reality of the humanity that we live in. And so even the Bible is saying If Christ has died to the elemental spirits of the universe, why do you live as it still belonged to the world with all this magical thinking, all this promises of completion and hope and all that? I hope that makes sense. I mean, in politics, you could say this as well. I mean, politics is always tries to dehumanize the other in a lot of different ways. But we begin to lose touch with the reality. We start to think humanity is a dysfunction and live in a bizarre world that often offers a quick fix that doesn't last long and that leads to guilt and fear and eventually disillusionment with that magical faith. So why are so many people leaving faith? Why are they doing it? Because it doesn't work. Because the logical outcome is disappointment. You've promised me all this stuff. You've given me all this. You've given me a great pitch. I'm sticking in there. I'm doing everything. I'm sacrificing this. I'm not doing that. I'm giving my 10%. I'm doing all this stuff. And yet it's not happening. I'm still miserable. I mean, could you imagine if, like, I know a lot of people here in Seattle who were I know some people who were a part of Mark Driscoll's church, you know, and to the point where they're like, yeah, I put me and my wife, she decided to take the womanly role. And I think Calvinism is really messed up in a lot of ways. I don't believe in predestination like that. And I don't believe that women are like less than men and things like that. But like I saw people where they did all that stuff. They're like, okay, my wife is subordinate to me. She cleans, she does this, I do this, and we took all that stuff. And they left and they were just like, not only are they so disillusioned by that and all those hoops and all those things they did, they're disillusioned with Christianity altogether. They just like that to me. I mean, I had a guy come up to me and say, I used to believe in that crap. And he had been a member of Mars Hill. So I used to believe all this stuff you believe. I don't believe in that stuff. It's crap. It's horrible. It's a waste of time. It's destructive. And I'm going like, man, that's not what I believe. I was trying to explain to him, but at the time, but he was so hurt and so pain and so disillusioned with it that he just was like, I don't want anything to do with you people. Capital C. And I don't know if I really can't blame him. And it can go worse as if you get stuck into those things, you end up becoming, disillusioned with your own humanity as well. And you don't know how to accept the fact that you're human. I mean, the message of grace changed my life in such a powerful way because I was so miserable. I thought God hated me. I thought I couldn't do it, what everybody else around me seemed to be doing. Years later, I found out that none of them were doing what I thought they were doing, and they were all living their own life and being human and full of faults and mistakes and things like that. But a lot of people were acting and being bad actors around me. But I felt so disappointed. And that's when I found grace, and acceptance was the only thing that I could do to accept that I was accepted. That was the only thing that could free me to be human and to be haphazardly human and to live life. Does that mean I don't, does that mean I see sin and separation. So that's why I'm always trying to bring people together. That's why I talk about hard conversations. That's why I say grace is anarchy. I believe sin is separation, grace is reunion. And I believe in that reunion. Are there certain things that are bad for me that I stay away from or temptation? Yeah, of course. It's life, but it's not what the church has told me. I don't necessarily read a book that was written to Middle Eastern folks 2,000 years ago and go like, oh, this is going to really tell me how to, live my life in relationships and how my sexuality should work and how my life should work and how I should vote. I read it and take it for within its context and don't go into that like, well, it's actually, I'm going to get the supernatural double meaning behind this book. And it's actually not talking about this king. It's actually talking about Satan. I saw this thing the other day about where this guy was for sure that this book in the Bible that was talking about a king was actually talking about the devil. And that was the infinite meaning. The finite meaning was this king but the infinite meaning was really the devil. And that's, once again, we have to have that magical thinking. That's why I don't like apologetics, because it has to have magical thinking in order to make everything work the way it does. Um, I see a lot of theology that gives, gives recipes for completeness. If you believe A, B, and C, and I see that a lot with like neo Calvinism and things like that. But I also see it in other more liberal denominations that I don't have time to go through all of them. And the wild thing about denominations is there's so many of them, because what happens is humanity happens. And most denominations, if you study like denominations, you'll realize that they broke off of each other. Like if you look at, like, say, even Jehovah's Witness, you can follow that back to what you would have considered like an Orthodox group. Oh, that was an Orthodox. Eventually they broke off because they're like, but there's all these different denominations, and these denominations, the First Baptist, Second Baptist, the Southern Baptist, they're all were one time a group with each other. But everybody said, well, we can't all agree because we're human beings, and these wide rules don't seem to cover us all. And so people had to go start another one for those wide rules. And then someone was like, well, those rules don't actually work for us either. So we got to move on to this denomination. Right now, non-denominations are the biggest church in the United States. And it's really funny. I was reading these people's comments about that. There was just an article about it, and people were like, it's heresy. Non-denominations are heresy. I'm like, most non-denominations are non-denomination because they just broke off from another denomination, just like your denomination broke off from about 5 denominations, you know? And they think like, oh, well, it's just funny to me that people think like, oh, my denomination has figured it out. And that's magical thinking. You're like, well, we can do this, and we can do, and I can do this through, it doesn't work that way. Um, and the funny thing is often even when our gut is telling us something's not right, you know, today's going to be a long talk, so don't feel the need to have to stick around. You can listen to it. I was going to make it a two-parter, but today I'm just going to finish it. It's a long talk. I was really inspired by this, and it's kind of an art project for me in a way. I don't know how to say that, but how to explain that, but it just is. It's just some inspiration. So feel free to stick around. If you don't, we can't, no worries. Maybe give us a thumbs up before you leave on the old likes and subscribes. That always helps us get into the Facebook algorithm or the YouTube algorithms. But even when our gut says something isn't right, and like I remember one time in my early 20s during Revolution, there was a church that we worked with sometimes, and like, listen, we want to, we know you've had quite a wild life as a teenager and all this stuff, and we want to help you break the soul ties with you've had sexual relationships and inappropriate relationships, and we want to help you break these soul ties. And I said, okay, that sounds interesting. So what are we going to do? I'm not kidding you. It was just confession. That's all it was. And then saying a few words like, and then I give this to God and I break this. And so I just went into this room, and the light was dark. There might have been a little music playing, maybe even an incense burning. I'm not kidding. And they would go through this. And it was literally just almost, I felt like I was bragging about things that I had done in the past. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, I had sex with this person, and then I drank all this that one night, and I break the soul ties, and, by the power of God and the King, it's broken free, that kind of thing. And it was just this ritual thing. And it was emotional, and it was dark, and it felt creepy, and it felt spiritual, and it felt weird because there was all these things making that vibe really there and bringing that feeling there, and the way the person in the room who was talking to me, and so, I left the room, after, and this was probably like an hour and a half, we just said a prayer, did all this stuff, and I walked out. And for the first day, I was like, yeah, that was powerful. It really happened. I'm free, blah, blah. But like 2 or 3 days, nothing had changed. And people said, well, Jay, you just didn't have enough faith. Or no, it was just the reality was it was really magical thinking. What changed for me is when I joined the 12-step program. And why did I change it, George, go into 12 steps? Is because I realized grace. When I realized I was loved and that my drinking wasn't a salvation issue, that my alcoholism wasn't going to send me to hell, and that didn't make God hate me, is when I realized, like, oh, God loves me just the way I am. I don't want to wreck my car. I'm not a good friend when I'm always drunk. I'm making really bad decisions. I'm always miserable. I'm miserable when I'm sober. I'm miserable when I drink too much. Like I always had like a sweet spot that I could never stay in when I drink. And I'm going like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I need to try something. And I went to something that worked, but it worked because I got a sponsor and I did work and I went through these things and I did one day at a time and I wrote out my resentments and took responsibility for my own actions and things like that. And that's what worked. But we have this like pseudo psychology. I mean, how many of our friends who've been through the ex-gay movement have seen that? It's like where they show up and they're like, all right, guys, we're going to tell you how to like you want to touch soft things, but also how to play football and how to be a man, and then the women are like, oh, we're going to come in and tell you how to put on makeup. And, used to be that you go to church not to wear makeup, but with lesbians, like, oh, let's put on some makeup and get you there and do this stuff and how to be feminine and how to want a man and how to want, feel the ruggedness of another human being, and it's this like pseudo psychology that didn't work. I mean, most of those groups, those big groups are gone and didn't work. It usually led to like broken homes, broken marriages, broken families, suicide. I mean, I've sat with many parents who lost their children, took their lives because they thought God hated them, thought the church hated them, didn't want anything to do with them. That's why I spoke out in 2005 as an affirming pastor. But the fact is like we have all this magical thinking and we think, well, we've got God. Like even like recovery in church. I remember going to this church and they wanted me to speak because they knew I was in recovery. And I was like, oh, I'm Jay, I'm an alcoholic. And they said, oh, we don't claim that here. We're not, we're we've been saved, we've been cleaned by the blood of, we don't talk about that here, you know. And it was like, the alternative to the 12-step program was now you're not admitting, now you're not going to say you're powerless. Now it was really, really like, oh, so when we do it, we have to have magic God coming down and change. I prayed really hard that my mom wouldn't die of cancer. I've prayed really hard that things would get better between Israel and Palestine. I've done that. There's been times where I just so broken I didn't know, and that doesn't work. I don't know if God intervenes or not. I don't know how God intervenes. That's not my specialty. But what I know is that when magical thinking often leads to really broken people and broken human beings, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having customs and things like that. I mean, I look at it in a very Paulinian way of when he was talking to the Galatians and he was talking to Gentile Christians and Jewish Christians. And he was telling the Jewish Christians, like, listen, what you guys are doing, you can do that, but it's not going to make any difference between salvation or not salvation. It's not going to make any difference how God feels about you. You can do that, but you can't push it on other people and tell other people you have to do that, because that's what they were doing to the Gentiles. And they're saying, you guys got to love each other. You got to stop biting and devouring one another. You got to stop demanding your own way with one another. You got to stop pushing your ways of thinking onto these people. Like, it's, if you want these customs and you want to do these things, great. If you want to be Catholic, great. You do that, but you can't say, well, this person has to be that or they're out. This person has to believe these A, B, and C or they're out. That's just not what it's about. And we'll go through Galatians in January, starting in January, because we do that every year. So to offer up, too often we end up seeing the worst of others and self for how far we are willing to compromise others and self for this magical fix or a ticket to paradise. And unfortunately, I see it with a lot of older folks as well, a lot of boomers, as they would call them, people who followed my parents and now follow me, and how they react to just the things that I say or clips from my talks. And when I'll sit down and try to have a conversation with them, just even online, and be like, well, listen, this is where I'm coming from. This is the scholarship. This is what the Bible says, and sometimes when they can't answer, and I've had this happen on numerous occasions, too many to feel great about, makes me worry. Um, but where they couldn't defend themselves, so they went to, well, you're just of the devil, or I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. You have been deceived. It wasn't possible for them to enter into a conversation where they may have been wrong. They've been taught so long and are so submerged in those traditions and those customs that aren't even that old, like 100-year-old thinking, theological thinking, that they can't, I can't pull them out of the water. They want to pull me down. They can't, they're like, nope, I got to be under here. I can only breathe underwater now. I can't, I can't be a human anymore. I can't, I can't even argue well. I can't disagree well. We can't have we can't reason. I can't reason with you. Um, and that's why we got to return back to humanity. I don't know. I think we've got to see sin in a different way. We've got to see grace in a different way. I think when we realize that this is stuff that we've just made up over time, and certain things we've projected onto the stuff, we've got to learn to let that go and help people let that go. And I'll be honest, often when people like rebuke me in the name of Jesus, people are like, block them, block. I don't block those people because I'm kind of hoping that, well, maybe they're just, this is a longer road for them to walk down. Maybe maybe they're on a different journey than I am. And I mean, I remember one time talking to my dad, and he's 85 now, and this was when he was 70, and we were having this theological conversation. He goes, "What do you expect? I'm 75 years old." He's 85 now. Or said something, 70 something years old. How do you expect me to, I can't just, how do I change? And it was almost as though he was saying, I agree with you. I understand what you're saying, and it sounds great, but I'm so old and I've preached this for so long. Like if I change now, people are going to think I'm crazy. How can I do, I've got all these people who believe the same thing that I believe. Now, if I change, I'm going to lose my community. I'm going to lose these people. And see, that's the problem with allowing church to be this bubble thing. If we don't have a public life, we have these communities, and all of a sudden now we're going to lose our community. We're going to lose our living. We're going to lose the people we care about. We might lose family members, all this because of magical thinking, or all this because we subscribed to something that was just a hypothesis, and maybe a bad hypothesis, but we're too deep. We're too deep in. And so we've lost our humanity. We've lost our ability to reason. And I mean, we see this every day. I mean, we see this by people who are, enamored with the idea of like politicians somehow are going to save the world. You have these people that say, well, I believe God created everything, but God called me to love other people. But then they give the leaders and their politicians now they've screwed up so much that I compared to like how people look at Donald Trump today and other even leaders today, compared to how they looked at my dad. I mean, my dad had a 15-minute affair and that was done. Everything was done. Everything he had worked his whole life for was done. Now they're like, well, he wanted to grab him by the vagina and all that stuff. God uses imperfect people, like, because they had to come to the realization that that's how it is. But now they've gone so far the other way of being like, well, but God's using them, so I should, not mind war and not mind mistreating people and not mind tearing families apart. I can look at that. It's just all this magic, like the magical thinking is just trying to adjust and fix, and it can't even stay solid because it doesn't work. And so people are having to figure out new ways to do it, rather than just saying, okay, let's try to live life on life's terms. Let's practice radical acceptance. Okay, if I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, and my neighbor is everybody, including my enemy, what does that look like? I think one of the greatest things that happened now to revolution is that we don't meet in a place and that I don't have a whole community of people around me. It's a lot harder to raise funds and things like that. But the fact that I'm not sitting in a room I would like to do that again, but it would never be. I don't want anybody to ever feel like this is my community. I want them to feel like everything outside of this is my community. This is a place where I come, talk about religion, we talk about culture, we talk about philosophy, we talk about, theology and psychology, and we talk about these things and we work these things out in our life. But I live in reality. I live in humanity. We don't need a coffee shop and then a bookstore, and then we don't need all this stuff in one place. We don't need to hide away from the world. We need to live within that world, even if we're saying we're not of this world. But remember, when we just read about, when you're not of this world, then stop doing all these weird religious practices, because that was the world at the time. That's why context is important. Superstition and rituals, that lead into this in Galatians, and I try to stay out of Galatians as much as I can. Usually Zoe keeps me pretty good on that, but I kid them. If we weren't going so long, I'd tell you a story about Zoe. It's really good. Listen to me. Okay, where are you, Galatians? I know I have you especially marked. Maybe I'll tell it, but I'm going to read this first. Galatians 5. 1 through 6. 5, 1 through 6. Where are you, 5? To give an idea of what Galatians looks like for me, it's like, it's like 2 Corinthians, nothing. Galatians, everything. Galatians 5. There you are. But where's the number? 4. There's 4. Does anybody see the 5? Have I hidden it? Oh, there it is. It's right down there. For freedom in Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. Listen, I, Paul, am telling you that if you let yourself be circumcised, Christ will be of no benefit to you. Once again, I testify to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the entire law, if you're doing it for that reason. You want to be justified by the law, have cut yourselves off from Christ, and you have fallen away from grace. For through the Spirit, faith was eagerly waits for the hope of the righteousness. So the idea here is like the magical thinking isn't getting you any closer to God. You're being sold something. You're being told, if you give this up, give up your foreskin, or you give there, or you do this, or you gave that, or you add this, and you read this, then somehow it's going to make you holy. Somehow it's going to make you different. Somehow it's going to separate you from others. And he's saying that's just not how it works. Might look a little bit different in the shower, the public shower, but that's about it. You're still human. I can cover myself in tattoos and make my identity, punk rock, but I'm still basically a human being. I mean, I am basically just that, very much that. So even and then in 4:9, Paul says, now, however that you have come to know God, or rather God known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and beggarly elements of the elemental spirits? And I think what he's saying is the elemental spirits, how can you go back to the idea of do's and don'ts and theology that puts other people down and that lifts you up and does, how do you didn't find God. God found you. Why are you going back to these things? You are loved. You are accepted by that which is greater than yourself. That's Paul Tillich. We'll do Paul Tillich, that sermon again next year. We do it every year. You are accepted, not because you believe more, not because you think more, not because you believe less, but just you are accepted, period. And Paul, we continue to go back to these elemental spirits. And the elemental spirits he's talking about was a religion that he was a part of, folks. That he's saying there was just so much magical thinking there that just doesn't do it. That's not the way. So one of the great things about Zoe is he contacted me last night and said, Jay, I've got something I want to push back on you. And I said, oh, okay. And he's like, but I don't want to know when to do it. I said, well, how about Monday? I don't have the kids on Monday. Well, can we talk on Monday? And why I wanted to say this about Zoe is that there's certain people that care about you and know who love you. If anybody else says, I got something to tell you, I'm going to be like, if you don't tell me now, I'm going to go insane. But to have a friend that loves you and cares about you and wants the best for you, is another way of being released from all of that. And we're able to go, yeah, let's talk about it on Monday. And that's it. Like I don't have to worry about it. And it's great to have people in your life where you can say, like, enough that even if they're going to drop a bomb on you or they're going to tell you something, which is probably not going to be a bomb, but you know what I'm saying? If they're going to tell you something, they're going to tell you something that you missed or you missed, but they love you. It feels different. And I think so many of us don't experience that in church. We don't experience that in reality. We don't experience that even outside of church and life, where we and I we want to put it in a way that trusting that in someone for me is like trusting that I'm accepted. I'm accepted no matter what I do, no matter what you think of me, no matter if you think I'm a demon of God or that I'm disillusioned and believe in fairy tales. But when I know I'm loved, when I know I'm accepted, it allows me to live life on life's terms. It allows me to uh, practice radical acceptance of, like, okay, it makes it a little bit easier, you know. And I think we've really left the real radical things of loving neighbors, loving each other, working for justice, working for peace, working for equality. I think those are really the things about dying to flesh and picking up your cross daily. I promise, folks, we're so close to the end. But if this is a 2-hour talk, it's a 2-hour talk. Like I said, feel free to come back later. Maybe Brian will want to cut this into 2 pieces. We'll figure it out. And so I want to say the superstition and rituals that we have to set our free selves free from, but that's even traditions, you know, um, have to do that. Traditions and customs also can get in the way. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with those, but when we put them into a place of like authority, we might be moving away into that magical thinking again. Now, I've had folks in the past say, why don't you just become a humanist? Humanism has their own issues that I struggle with. So some of my friends became humanism and then they told me how bad I was wrong and that God doesn't answer, God doesn't show up. And I'm like, man, I know half the stuff you're telling me, but you're telling me in a way like you're talking to me like I'm an idiot. And so it's just never been anything that's really like, I don't like humans that much. I mean, I think we should return to our human, but I don't want to get into humanism. So humanism is just not my bag. But if you're a humanist, you're welcome here. One time I sat down with I did an interview with a humanist podcast. I'm like, well, could I just be like a Christian humanist? And they're like, no, and it was crazy to see because it was like all of a sudden their community was like, you're an outsider. Like, Christians, you make us outsiders. And then I was like, could I just be a Christian humanist? And they're like, no, you are not welcome. That's not how it works. And I know now that's not how it works, but they really, were like, nope, you can't be a member. I was like, wow, you sound like every church I went to growing up. But all these like giving into these rituals and things, whatever. Like I go to church on Christmas and we go see the pageantry and we listen to the music and I'm moved. I don't have any problem with that. That's not for me, but I'm not going to, I like to go to music. I like to go to church with good worship. Like I just would love to go to a church without worship, but I don't even really feel comfortable in church. Probably why I'm now doing an online community. Not even community, online teachings, online group. We're a gathering, an online gathering. We are gathered together for this thing called love, for this thing called life. This is not what I believe to be following Christ. Yes, there are things that can give you some peace and sense of control, but those things are sort of superstitions and rituals, traditions, and customs. We're going to read these things and we're going to read the confessions and things like that. It's just not for me. I'm glad there are people who do it. But we have seen what happens when control becomes part of the work of those who don't like, work. And what happens to those who don't like control or need or are seen out of control. We see what this type of stuff does to folks like that. And People who don't like control, we call it sin off. Oh, they're out of control, or they have a rebellious spirit, and is it fair to call that sin or vilify others because of this, because they don't like the same things that you like, or they don't worship the same way you worship? I know I'm sounding very hippy dippy right now, but the whole point is not really to be hippy dippy or start a universalist Unitarian church. The whole point is to reclaim our humanity at this point. It's not to think, well, let's start another religion or start another type of religion or start another denomination. The whole point is not that. It's to just say we're reclaiming our humanity, and we're going to be human, and we're going to let you be human. And when you fail, I'm going to be there to build you back up and restore you. And we're going to be human together, because we're all human, and that's just the reality. We're going to live in that reality. We're going to use these biblical ideas and thoughts, but they're going to be part of our humanity, and they're going to help maybe direct us in our humanity. But as soon as it starts creeping out of the reality and into these magical thinking and all these, probably going to pull back. At least I am. I don't have my rings on today, but I usually wear like a horseshoe, and my lucky number is 13 and all that stuff. I don't really believe that stuff, but I think it's fun. My unlucky number is 7, so I have the reverse of numbers there. Maybe that's because I'm dyslexic. But do I really believe that? No, but it's fun. So I get that. We see a loss of real life and real life outcomes because we've lost a rational way of thinking. And rationality and cause and effect have been kind of abandoned in a lot of ways, so we have, that's a sin because we think Paul said it, or we think because Jesus, that must be a sin. And let me tell you why. And it's right here. Well, what about cause and effect? Well, they end up being happy and living a great life and doing this stuff. But, this book here says, okay, can you be a human for a second? Can you maybe not tear this family apart because someone said 2,000 years ago to a group of Romans? Can we look at this and think, maybe, hey, the way they treated women back then as property and things like that, and what sexuality really was, and that it was demasculizing women and men, could we maybe think that that's not how that works? Like, they were doing their best to grasp that, but they didn't even have a concept of sexuality. That was really something Freud brought. There's a reason people say, like, oh, you can educate yourself out of the Bible, or you can do these things. Is because they fear the truth. They fear reality. I don't want science because science tells me the world's older than 6,000 years. But a lot of people have said, okay, well, we can figure that. Okay, we can bind and loose some things. We can let that go. Okay. So there's a lot of Christians out there like, oh, of course it's not 6,000. They were just doing the best they could, but the world was flooded. Or or Paul did mean gay people, even though he had no idea of what LGBTQ would mean ever, because he didn't know what Freud was going to say, and he didn't understand those things. But yeah, we're going to stick with that one. So we play this game of which ones we want to stick with and which we don't. So when we see this loss of life, when we see this loss of humanity, the loss of real life outcomes, because we lose this, the cause and effect has been abandoned, because rationality has been abandoned. And we talked about the pseudo therapy of like the anti-gay movement. I already covered that. That was just in my notes now, but we covered that earlier. This like, well, we're going to pray the gay away, or we're going to do this stuff. And it's insult to injury. And it's like moving out of your wheelhouse, and it's claiming more power than you have. And you're basically setting up that person for failure, and you're setting up God for failure, setting up your religion for failure, setting yourself up for failure, setting those people up for failure. And that's not good news. We have complicated, and we have turned it into like Magic the Gathering. We've turned it into like we're play acting, like we're going to go out. No, I'm giving you my magic spell. We've really let a magical thinking do that. How weird it was for me when I remember Rodney Howard-Browne came to Florida when I was in my teenage years, and he was hitting people, and they were falling out laughing, and they were passing out, and they were doing all this stuff. And everybody's like, oh, this is what God's doing. And he came up to me, and he told me to stand up because he knew who I was. Oh, there's Baker's kid. His dad's in prison. I'm going to hit him with the new wine or whatever, the laughing spirit. He had me stand up, and he goes, and he wanted to he's like, well, can I pray for you? I'm like, yeah, you can pray for me. And he prayed for me, but I'm like, I'm not going out. I'm not going to laugh because I don't think this is real. And matter of fact, I really feel sad for all these people because this is what their life is now. They need some sort of release, so they're willing to come to a church and all act like they're falling into spiritual laughter. And it was weird. It was really a strange event. So Christian recovery, you're not okay. We got all right. But like a lot of these so-called spiritual Christian groups don't want to live life on life's terms, and usually that's why they have to cut themselves off. And when it becomes very tragic is when we see people like the Kool-Aid, when they all committed suicide with the Kool-Aid. Jim Jones, Jim Jones was raised in the same denomination I was raised in. He was Assemblies of God, but he just kept getting weirder and weirder. It's like, so maybe we should go somewhere and create our own world and do our own thing. We can all be together. What happens is that's the logical conclusion to magical thinking, unfortunately. And it can make us so delusional and out of touch with life and out of touch with humanity, and can turn us into really mentally ill people. Because this is not living life on life's terms, it's not being humanity. The question is, do you really believe that? If you really do believe God is somehow the essence of everything and the ground of being, and in all the molecules, we're breathed, humanity is breathed by God, then this should not be a hard sermon or a hard talk to take in. This should be, we're just going to reclaim that which was us, which is us, which is humanity. We're not going to find devils in every little place. And I want to reiterate this, because I know it can sound very lefty and liberally. What I'm saying is, but for those folks is you can't act like you have all the answers either. And you have the magical thinking that you're all good and those people are all bad. Because I can tell you, a lot of very conservative people, when I was a kid growing up, made sure I had food on the table when my dad was in prison and my mom was doing her best, and came and made sure I had clothes on my back when I went to school. When my dad got out of prison, he didn't have a place to live or a car to drive or even a wallet. Franklin Graham helped my dad. Someone I don't agree with on almost everything theologically, but he showed love. He showed compassion. He loved the prisoner. I mean, it might have been because my dad was a ex-famous televangelist or whatever, but still, so we can't scapegoat it. It's like we can't get down to binary thinking. We have to be open to going okay, there's going to be contradictions in the way we think. So anytime we start to create the community that, well, this is our community and we're going to keep out all the righties or all the MAGA people or all that, we're not helping humanity anymore. We've got it. That's another thing about humanity, is realizing how diverse we all are and how we think differently, and not using these broad strokes, is also realizing just because I think I have the right political think, and I have the right, religion, I can judge whoever I want. I've got it. So, because for me to do that would just be more magical thinking. Nonviolence has really helped me to kind of give people the benefit of the doubt. It's not like I'm going at 100 Trump to trust people when they change and they do things, but I give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm never going to say, well, it's too late, or you can't say this, or you can't do this. I'm going to go, okay, let's find a little hope in this, and let's go and let's see where it goes. Let's live one day at a time with this. And oh, nope, that person's going to go, that gets too late, or, oh, they're going to do it again. You go, okay, well, I'm going to not live in that world. A lot of the reason restoration doesn't happen in the church is because, too often is conservatives don't seem to know how to do it. And then liberals think, oh, it's just going to give them a license to do it again. They're just going to do it again. We can't do it. Oh, well, these preachers just come back. Well, it's like, you guys aren't doing restoration. I mean, Paul says, if you think you're too good to restore someone and help someone, you're only fooling yourself. I mean, he's saying, this is humanity. We all fall short. This is humanity. We all make mistakes. Someone gets brainwashed and then they get free from that brainwash. Someone pulls himself up out of those traditions. We're not going to push their head back in. Oh, nope, not up here. So this is for everybody. This is reclaiming humanity for everybody. Now I'm going to hit on that in a second, and you'll see where I'm coming from. We avoid the real world because sometimes because it may cause us to stray away, so we gotta get, and then AA, I learned, in the 12-step program, I learned, I'm not supposed to say the name, it's supposed to be anonymous. In those ways, you learn like, okay, when I first got into AA, I didn't know, I didn't go to a lot of bars. I didn't go out, hang out with a lot of my drunk friends. I remember I got invited to my friend's bachelor party and I went, but I held my AA coin the whole time. And I said, I'm going to stay in the bus. I'm not going to go into any of the clubs or anything. And it's what I'm going to do. Now, give years later, I love to hang out in dive bars, have church in bars, and I do all this stuff, but it's because I'm comfortable there because I know that stuff that they're serving is not going to help me, but maybe I'll get limitless Diet Cokes. So I'm not saying that there's things that we have to, maybe tear away from our lives if something's causing us damage and causing others damage that we have to take time from. I'm not saying that either. But it's okay to let people actually live again, you know. But the fact is, we're in a place where where a lot of this thinking has led us to judgmental thinking and constant gatekeeping. Like I said, even with the humanists, they were gatekeeping. They were doing that as well. Christians gatekeeping. I'm gatekeeping. Politicians gatekeeping. I mean, look how politicians talk about the other party all the time. And there's a lot of things that they do that are really awful that aren't that different. Now, if there's one party supporting your group, I can understand why you'd be like, and the other one's not, why you would be like, oh, they're really different. But they're both really deep into capitalism and bought off and, do things that aren't great. It's a bad situation. I think putting faith in those people is probably not the wisest thing you can do. Hope doesn't hurt, but this idea of constantly having to have this binary thinking, constantly have gated communities to keep out one side, but that when we don't realize when we're keeping people out, it's also keeping us in. It's keeping us into and program us into a type of thinking. Now I'm puttering down only because I'm tired and I've never given a talk this long, not in years at least. But I think has the church, as the church, capital C, all walks church, progressive, conservative, have we of the church turned people heartless in a particular way to particular people? I mean, I know politics do that. And have we allowed politics to come in and influence our religion and compromise our religion and mix it up all together that we can't see the difference between politics and religion anymore? And now all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to love my neighbor as myself, but now I can exclude this person because they're not my neighbor because I think they broke a law, and I don't want my taxes to go to help feed this person, and I can now justify that because my politicians are chosen by God. I mean, it doesn't add up, doesn't work. But are we turning people heartless? And that's my worry about the progressive church that at one time I had so much hope in, is that it was turning people heartless towards now we became a mirror image of them. Everything that we believe is opposite and different and this and that, but now we're just as dismissive, just as judgmental towards them as they were towards us. It's just revenge. And what is it? Nietzsche said, those who fight monsters need to be careful that they don't become monsters. That's 2 Nietzsche quotes in one talk. I'm just reading my notes here so I don't go over anything again. This is what I wanted to say, like, too, is like how we look at customs, and everybody does it. Everybody separates people by these customs and by religious acts and by different things. And an example I wanted to give was like, did you guys see the pastor who was shot by a rubber bullet protesting ICE? And I've seen him quite a few times, and I think what he's doing really incredible work. But the reason he's getting attention for getting hit with a rubber bullet is because he has a collar on and because he's a pastor. And it shows how even outside of the church, even in our human minds, we still separate all the other people getting hit with rubber bullets or the kids who have like masks on their face getting hit with rubber bullets, compared to the guy who's got the collar on getting hit. Oh, it's such a shame. Oh, that's really going to wake people up if they see the preacher getting, hit with the bullets. And, the only way we know he's a preacher is because he has a white collar on. Um, so we all have this separation in mind, in our mind, in our lives, in our way of seeing things. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but I just want to point that out, that even people who are atheists, oh, I can't believe they shot the preacher with the rubber bullets, because it's really all equally bad. All the people getting hit with rubber bullets is bad. It's all lacking our humanity, but for some reason we can see the humanity of the guy that we don't even maybe agree with, because we at least have an idea of what some Christians doing. And if they have a collar, at least we know we're probably not evangelical. So we go, oh, Father Lanigan got hit with the rubber bullets. It's bad. But so is, Gina, the coffee shop worker, atheist, anarchist. It shouldn't take us a collar. If I went and got shot with a rubber bullet, they would just be like, oh, he's probably Antifa, because I don't wear a collar. So that's the idea, is that now I want to hit you something with harsh reality now, harsh humanity. And this one I'd say is pretty heavy. And not as heavy as you would think, but it's interesting. And it's not for the weak of heart or not for the sensitive. And I want to make it very clear. I am not a type A personality. I'm very sensitive. I overthink. I take things personally. If you tell me not to take something personally, I'm probably going to take it way more personally. So I just avoid that when we're conversation. But I want to talk about Belfast for a second. And the other side of getting away from magical thinking. And this might not be everybody's cup of tea or cup of Guinness, but in Belfast, there's something called taking the piss. And it's a very unique way of clearing out magical thinking and even sensitivity. And some people can't handle it. And I get it. But I remember Pete's mom once telling me, like, you understand when people take the piss here, that's a way of us showing love and that we care about you. And I remember saying, well, then Pete must really love me. He takes the piss a lot. But it's very liberating after about a year of it. Because everybody participates in it. Everybody participates, and it's usually your mates. And usually, now I will say this: if you take the piss out of somebody who's not your mate and you don't know well, and you take the piss too hard, you've overstepped the boundary. So there are rules and kind of unspoken truths and rules into the situation. But like, if you're insecure about something, more than likely someone's going to take the piss out of you. But for me, it's almost like they're taking the sting out of it. It's like we're all coming in like, hey, I'll wear my hat and no one will know I have no hair, and that's like, oh, hey, Baldy, how's it going? Or something, maybe not that obvious, but they'll just say something. Or if you're telling a story that's really like boasting yourself, they'll take the piss out of you and they'll make a joke and you'll probably hear about it for another year. You might even get a nickname out of it. But by the idea of taking the piss, it's facing the realities, the horror of realities that we live in, the horror of our humanity, and laughing at it. And you can do the same thing to them. And you're both have taken this horror and you've put it out on the table and you've seen it and you've mocked it and you've laughed at it, and all of a sudden it's lost its power. In the same way, like religion lost its power when grace came into my life. Like legalism lost its power. I mean, I still argue, and sometimes it gets me, sometimes it pisses me off. And sometimes someone taking the piss, oh, that stung a little bit, oh, sorry, mate, or you can say that. Or sometimes they'll be like, oh, good. That's what it's really good, is if it stings just a little bit. But the idea is you kind of, it's this way of radically accepting when I told somebody, like, if I was disfigured or hurt really bad or something, and I just moved to Belfast and go sit in a pub. And by the time the bartender's done taking the piss out of me, I'll probably never think about that again, because it's just out in the open. Hey, we all know you're hiding this. Hey, we all know you got this going on. Hey, we all know. and we're just going to put it out in the open. We're all going to have a laugh about it because that's just humanity. We are insecure human beings. We're trying to build ourselves up. We're trying to do this. And there's the embracement of the absurdity of reality. So there's definitely truths within those jokes, and sometimes they sting, but eventually it just becomes, it's all out there. And there's not judgment there because we're laughing about it. We're going through it. It's just part of life. I listened to this podcast called Tea with Me, and it's an Northern Irish podcast in Belfast, and I really recommend it. It's called Tea with Me. You can find it easy. This guy Todd does it. Very good. So that's the talk today, folks. Thanks for those who stuck with it, and I don't blame the ones who didn't, because I wouldn't want to listen to anybody go on this long either. But I felt like this was a single piece that needed to be done in one act. So I say goodbye to the gospel. I say, tear down the steeple and free the people. That is the name of this talk. And the reason I named the talk is because when I was a kid, we used to go, here's the steeple, open up the church, and there's the people. And there's more to it, but I can't remember the rest. But we used to do this. And I was thinking, I said, well, what if we just tore down the steeple and we just freed all the people? That we don't allow our churches to become communities anymore. And we said, well, no, we want to be human. Well, you can't do this. Well, I'm a human, so I'm probably going to do that. Well, there is. Okay, well, bye. See ya. Because I'm not going to live my life that way. And they might say you're in rebellion, and they might say you're bad, but you're saying, no, I love Jesus. I'm going to follow Jesus, and I'm going to allow my humanity to be a part of that, because that's what it was. Jesus became nothing. And that's what I was explaining. Came nothing on the earth, became human. Jesus hung out with really fallible, imperfect humans. I mean, you think about Peter. Oh, I don't know who's Jesus. Who's this man Jesus? You see all these folks and just the reality of these folks. And it's like, I'm going to be human. I'm going to be haphazardly human, and I'm going to follow my convictions, and I'm going to study. But you know what? I'm not going to give in to my faith. Is probably going to be completely different than everybody else's, because that's just how it works out. And I'm not going to use broad strokes, because I'm a human. I'm an individual. I'm different, and I'm unique. And so are the people who are getting bombed and killed. So are the people who are being mistreated by ICE. They're all like us. They all have hopes and worries and fears. What's going to happen in the holidays? How are they going to pay their bills? And they're all going through this together. So do your conservative friends. So do your friends who have freaking Donald Trump pictures on their Christmas tree. I literally saw that. They're humans too, and they've had their own experiences, and they've jumped into their own way of thought. And it's like, how can I be a human to that human? Because it seems so unhuman to me, Well, let's talk about how we become human. But right now, my focus is let's ask the church. Let's ask our communities to return to humanity. Say, like, tear down the things. Take out the stained glass windows. I don't want to go into a God museum anymore. I don't want to go into a museum of sin management. I want to be set free I don't want to do pseudo psychology. I don't want to, I want to know if this custom is, if this is really a custom, if this is something really biblical, or if it was just a custom that we need to throw out. I want to be able to agree with disagree with other people and still love them and be human. So, there you go. Thanks, everybody. One of the things I want to add to that about magical thinking, just a few things that it does, is it treats God like a force to be harnessed. Okay. Listen, as soon as you thought the sermon was done, I pull it back in. We've been 1 hour and 43 minutes, folks. Magical thinking does this. It reduces faith to technique. It treats God like a force or a power to be harnessed. And it creates anxiety when rituals don't work. So there's a good thing for you to think about if you're on either spectrum of the religion of the right wing or the left wing, here, good thing here, like this, Magical thinking reduces faith to technique, treats God like a force to harness, like I use my God power on you. Mine's blue and yours red. And it creates anxiety when rituals don't work. And we all know what that can lead to. So there you go. Thanks for sticking. Don't forget to like and subscribe. As many people I've had come through here today, we've only gotten 5 likes. Like and subscribe. And you can, Jay, I don't have a YouTube account. If you want to do Revolution a huge favor, you could get yourself a YouTube account and like and subscribe. Share this stuff with people. Watch the little short stories I've been putting up. I put one up when I was told you I put some up during Thanksgiving, and I did when I was doing the Christmas tree stuff. And I'll be sharing some more stuff. I have some ideas about the movies that affected me mostly. The movies that had a big effect on me between the ages of 1 and 10. I'm going to do a little thing on that here on YouTube, and it'll be about probably 4 minutes. So thank you. Listen, one thing we do need your support. I hate asking for money. I recently had somebody be like, "Oh, are you going to go spend this on the money you beg for?" And that is like a big insecurity of mine. And I'm just telling you, I don't like it, but it's what I have to do. And right now, I'll tell you, we'd love to have you join us. We have 4 people now working with Revolution, including myself. So we have Brian, and we have Teresa, and we have Ray. And a lot of cool things are going to happen through that. We're going to probably save a lot of money on some of the stuff that we haven't been in the past. It's just going to be great. Hopefully going to get a new website. We're going to be better connected on the internet world, so you can get to places and do all these things. So good things are happening, but we really do need your support. And I'd like to make a living. I did not make half of my income that I would be usually made from Revolution this year. I didn't even make half of that. I'm working a few jobs, but even that's not enough because they're so sparse in my life. I would love to be able to pay my rent in December and buy Christmas gifts for my children. And this work in the past has made that possible, and I'd like to continue to allow this work to do that as well. So we really could use your support, and that's just me being as real as can be. If that doesn't work, maybe I'll start doing the prosperity gospel next and promising you, like, if you give, you'll get. But that's not how it works. Maybe it does, but it doesn't. I've not seen that in my own life. But really, we can't do this without you. I can't do this without you, and it's tough. And I know we're all going through a tough time. And as always, we'd rather have you than your money. Other ways you can help is by sharing on social media, letting people know the work, showing people this stuff, listening to the podcast. Go to the podcast, give us a 5-star review. Gives us thumbs ups here and likes and subscribes. You can even turn on the notifications, so every time I turn on a live thing, you'll know right away. But we do need your support. Right now, I'm in the short term thinking of like, God, I got to get it to 2026, and I hope I can do that and for my family. But I'm really excited about the future, and I haven't been excited about the future. I've only had one person working with me for years now. So to have 4 people working with me and good at doing different things, it's just mind boggling. I've had to retrain and go back to like, oh, yes. Like I kind of want to give you this responsibility. Okay, here, take it, do something with it, because I don't know how to do it. And I've been trying to do it and I haven't done it very well. So, all right, can you talk to our guys who handle our finances and talk to them about our bills? And can you do the, so cool things are happening, but we definitely need your support. So if you can go to revolutionchurch.com and make a donation, nothing's too small. And of course, nothing's too big. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for sticking with me. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. How do I turn this thing off, you guys? I don't even know how to turn it off. So we'll just sit here and stare at each other awkwardly. There you go. It's not working. Oh, there it is. Bye.